We begin this hour with the ongoing tax cut battle in Congress. In the last hour, the House did pass an extension of the 15% cut in dividend and capital gains taxes. The Wall Street Journal editorial board says this may be the most important vote on the economy the House has taken all year.
In the end, 9 Democrats crossed the aisle to vote, with the Republicans approving the bill 234 to 197. Leading up to that vote, the debate was fierce and heated.
Everybody loses under this bill. Everybody. That is, except the top 1/5 or 1%. Some might call them the super rich. Apparently, the majority call them donors.
It is beneath the dignity of every member of this House to suggest that somehow this has to do with contributions.
The bill now goes to conference. Last month, the Senate passed its own tax legislation, which did not include the tax breaks for capital gains and dividends. However, both leaders from both houses, the Republican leadership that is, say they will insist on getting those provisions back in the bill in time for it to be sent up to President Bush for his signature. Maria?
Rob, thank you. The emotional battle on the House floor, a reminder of the dramatically differing opinions on tax cuts. Here to continue debating that hot topic for us is Chris Edwards, Director of Tax Policy Studies at the Cato Institute, and Bob McIntyre, Director of Citizens for Tax Justice. Gentlemen, it is nice to have you with us. Welcome.
Thank you.
Let me begin with you, Mr. Edwards. Your thoughts on the extension?
I think it's inevitable. I think Congress would have extended these tax cuts, and they will, before they expire in 2008 for sure, because I think whatever politicians in office in 2008, if they were to expire, you'd see the market drop dramatically and corporations changing their behavior. I think it would have been really negative. So I'm glad that the sooner we take action, the better to create market stability here. What Congress has passed today is not radical at all. The President's Tax Commission proposed a full elimination of the double tax on dividends. This just drops the rate to 15%. Many other countries fully eliminate the double tax on dividends, like Australia and New Zealand. So what we've got here is a sensible, incremental reform.
Sensible. Mr. McIntyre, do you agree?
Absolutely not. The Senate started off this year with a similar revenue target to the House in terms of tax cuts. And then after the hurricanes, the war in Iraq continuing, and all the other problems we faced, they concluded we couldn't afford it. And they scaled it way back and included basically just alternative minimum tax relief for 1 year. What the House has done is adopt the Senate's alternative minimum tax plan and add another $85 billion to it over the next 10 years, and we can't afford it. We're funding a quarter of our regular government programs on borrowed money right now, and you can't sustain that.
What about the argument, Mr. McIntyre, that the tax cuts, in fact, is the reason that this economy did turn around? 2 years ago, if we were talking about the economy, we were talking about job losses, we were talking about slow growth, we were talking about recession, and in fact, things came all the way back. A lot of people believe that is partly due to the President's tax cut plan.
Well, we're talking specifically about these capital gains and dividend cuts, and they didn't do any good. The stock market has been flat for the last 2 years, as everybody with an investment portfolio knows.
Perhaps, but it triggered a number of companies to come out and either institute a dividend or raise their dividend.
The market rose 20% in the year following the May 2003 dividend and capital gain tax cut. It's more than just a coincidence. The S&P 500 companies dramatically increased their dividend payouts in the months following that tax cut in 2003. That's more than a mere coincidence.
Well, let me just point out to you that under Bill Clinton, the stock market doubled. And under George W. Bush, so far, it's up by 5%, which is less than the rate of inflation.
Well, Bill Clinton also cut capital gains tax rates in 1997, so that was a very positive thing he did for the markets.
Well, let's talk about the ramifications of this, Mr. Edwards, because I want to take the other side on both of your arguments. Isn't it true that at some point, the fact that we continue to borrow and we are looking at twin deficits, at some point, the growth just stops, it just doesn't add up?
No, I think the deficit is a real problem. It's really immoral, frankly, that we're pushing all this debt onto the next generation of young workers. But this tax cut that was passed in the House today, $50 billion over 5 years, only $10 billion a year in a $2.6 trillion budget. It was a tiny drop in the bucket compared to how much spending has been increasing over the years. Spending has increased by hundreds of billions of dollars a year under this president the last few years. the tax cut is really a small portion of the size of those spending hikes we've seen.
Mr. McIntyre?
Well, I mean, look, you add up all the tax cuts that have been passed so far, and they cost about $2.5 trillion counting into interest over a decade. That's the reason we're running gigantic budget deficits, and we need to stop doing it. And at least the U.S. Senate has showed some sense here. Let's hope that the crazy, reckless people in the House will get their comeuppance this time, and the Senate will insist on some sense of responsibility on the fiscal side.
We will see, gentlemen. Thanks so much.
Thank
Chris
you.
Edwards, Bob McIntyre on the tax extension news tonight.